the match burned down to my fingers before I dropped it. I stood in the middle of my grandmother's living room, shaking the sting out of my hand, watching the small flame catch the edge of an old TV guide on the coffee table. I grabbed it fast, smothered it against the carpet with my shoe. The smell of singed paper filled the room. That was the moment I understood how far I had fallen. 48 hours ago, I had been standing in a bridal boutique in downtown Chicago, watching a seamstress pin the hem of a dress that cost more than 3 months of my old salary. My fiancé had picked it out. He said ivory made me look appropriately elegant. I had smiled and nodded and thought, this is my life now, I am so lucky. Now I was alone in a house that had been empty for 2 years, in a town so small it didn't have a traffic light, trying to start a fire in a fireplace I wasn't sure was structurally sound, because the power had been shut off and it was 38 degrees outside, and I had nowhere else to go. My name is Maya. I am 31 years old. And 12 days before my wedding, the man I had given up everything for told me to get out of his house and never come back. I need to tell you how I got here. Not the 48 hours. The 3 years. I met Daniel at a charity auction. I was there with a colleague from the school where I taught 4th grade. He was there because his company had sponsored the event. He was tall, confident, the kind of man who fills up a room without trying. He found me near the silent auction table, pretending to be interested in a weekend getaway package I could not afford to bid on, and he made me laugh within the first 4 minutes. I thought that meant something. We dated for 8 months before he said the word future out loud. By that point, I had already started rearranging my life around him in small ways I didn't notice at the time. I canceled a weekend trip with my best friend because Daniel had last-minute tickets to a gallery opening. I stopped going to my Thursday night ceramics class because he said it felt like I was always unavailable. I told myself I was just prioritizing. That's what people in serious relationships do. When he proposed, my mother cried happy tears on the phone for 20 minutes. My grandmother, who I called Grandma Ruth, listened to the whole story without saying much. When I finished, she said, "Baby girl, does he make you feel like more of yourself, or less?" I laughed and said she was being dramatic. She said, "Okay, I just want you to think about it." I didn't think about it. I moved into Daniel's house 6 months after the engagement. It was a beautiful house. 5 bedrooms in Lincoln Park, a kitchen that had been featured in an architecture magazine, a backyard with a stone patio and string lights. I remember standing in the master closet the first week, looking at the section he had cleared for my clothes, and feeling genuinely grateful, like I had been chosen. The first time he said something that made me go quiet, we had been living together for maybe 3 weeks. I had worn a dress to his company's quarterly dinner, a green wrap dress I had owned for years, something I felt comfortable and pretty in. On the drive home, he said, "That dress is a little much for a work event, don't you think?" I said I thought it was fine. He said, "I'm just thinking about how it reflects on me." He wasn't angry. His voice was completely calm. And somehow that made it worse, because I couldn't point to it as a fight. It was just a comment. Just a small adjustment. By the end of the first year, most of my wardrobe had been quietly replaced. Not in a dramatic, controlling way that I could name clearly. He would see something in a store and say it would look beautiful on me. He would comment, neutrally, when I wore something he hadn't chosen. He paid for everything, which I told myself was generosity, and which made it very hard to say no. He made more money in a month than I made in a year of teaching. He never let me forget it, not with words, but with the way he paused slightly before saying yes to things I asked for. The school was the thing he couldn't fully take from me. I loved my students in a way that felt like oxygen. I had been working toward a master's degree in education leadership slowly, 1 class at a time, online, mostly during summers. When Daniel and I got serious, I slowed down even more. He never told me to stop, he just asked questions. "Is that really how you want to spend your Saturday? Don't you think a teacher's salary is kind of a ceiling no matter what degree you have? I make enough for both of us. You don't have to grind like this." I took a leave from the program the spring before the wedding. I told myself it was just temporary. Wedding planning was overwhelming. I would go back after the honeymoon. Grandma Ruth called me that May. She had been unwell her heart, nothing catastrophic, but enough that she had decided to simplify her life. She was moving to a smaller apartment, closer to my aunt in Tennessee. She wanted to know what I wanted to do with her house. The house was in Millhaven, Indiana. Population just under 4,000. Grandma Ruth had lived there for 40 years. The house was old 1940s craftsman, 3 bedrooms, big front porch, a garden that had gone wild since she'd gotten sick. It needed work. A lot of work. But it was paid off, and it was mine if I wanted it. I told Daniel about it that evening. I said I was thinking we could maybe rent it out, or use it as a weekend place someday, or even just hold on to it as an asset. He listened and then said, "Millhaven? Maya, that place is a money pit. Property values out there are basically nothing. You'd spend more maintaining it than you'd ever make." He said I should talk to his real estate attorney about selling it quickly before it depreciated further. I called Grandma Ruth back and told her I needed more time to think. She said, "Take the house, baby. Some things aren't about money." I didn't take it then. I told myself I'd revisit it after the wedding. Grandma Ruth passed away in September. She left me the house anyway, in her will, along with a letter that my aunt mailed to me. I read the letter once and then put it in the bottom of my bag without telling Daniel, which I only now understand was because some part of me already knew what he would say about it. The weeks before the wedding moved fast. The venue was a restored estate outside the city, 220 guests. A florist who had done a senator's daughter's wedding. Daniel had opinions about every detail, and I had learned by then to offer suggestions once and let go. It was easier. It kept the peace. I told myself that after the wedding, things would settle. We would find our rhythm. This was just the stress of planning. 10 days before the ceremony, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop while Daniel was at work. I had the wedding seating chart open in one tab. In another tab, almost without meaning to, I had opened the website for the graduate program I had left. The spring application deadline was in 2 weeks. I read the re-enrollment requirements. It would take 1 letter from my former advisor, 1 updated statement of purpose, and a $120 fee. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe Grandma Ruth's letter was sitting in the bottom of my bag 2 feet away. Maybe I was just tired of feeling like I was slowly disappearing. I emailed my former advisor. I asked if she would write the letter. She wrote back within an hour. She said she would be honored to. She said she had wondered what happened to me. I re-enrolled that afternoon. I paid the fee with my personal account, an account Daniel didn't know I had kept from before we moved in together. I closed the tabs and went back to the seating chart and felt, for the first time in months, like I had done something that was entirely mine. I should have told him. I know that. I have thought about it 1,000 times since. Not because I owed him permission, I didn't, it was my education, my decision, but because what happened instead was so much worse. 5 days before the wedding, Daniel came home earlier than usual. I was on a call with a friend in the bedroom. When I came out, he was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open in front of him. He had gone through my browser history. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because it wasn't loud. Daniel was not a man who raised his voice, he was much scarier than that. He set my laptop down very carefully and looked at me and said, "You re-enrolled in your program." I said yes. I said I had meant to tell him. I said it wouldn't interfere with anything. He said, "You went behind my back." I said I hadn't, it was my own enrollment in my own program, I hadn't done anything to him. I heard my own voice shaking. He said, "I've been building a life for us, I've been paying for everything. I've been planning a future where you don't have to work yourself into the ground and you go and do this without even talking to me." He paused. "I don't know who you are right now." I tried to explain. I tried 3 different versions of the same sentence, and each time he looked at me like I was confirming something he had always suspected. Finally, he stood up and said, "I need you to leave." I thought he meant the room. He meant the house. He said it again, clearly, when I didn't move. He said he needed space to think, and he couldn't do that with me there. He said he would have his assistant box up my things and send them to my parents' house. He said not to call him. He said this, all of this, his voice still perfectly level while I stood in the kitchen of the house where I had rearranged myself for 3 years, wearing a shirt he had picked out, and I could not make my legs move. My parents lived 4 hours away in Ohio. My best friend had just had a baby and was barely sleeping. I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath Daniel's building for 40 minutes before I remembered. I had a house. It was mine. Grandma Ruth had given it to me. I drove to Millhaven. I arrived after midnight. I had my car, a bag I had packed in 7 minutes, my laptop, my purse, and a box of granola bars I'd grabbed from the gas station 2 miles outside of town. I had the house key on my key ring. I had kept it, even when I'd been too afraid to use it. The power was off. The water ran, barely, cold only. The heat didn't work. I found 2 wool blankets in the hall closet that smelled like cedar and dust, and something that was unmistakably Grandma Ruth, and I sat on the old couch wrapped in both of them and looked at the dark. The first morning I didn't cry. I was too numb. I made a list on my phone of what the house needed: power reconnected, heat serviced, a few windows recaulked, the back door rehung. In the daylight, the house was rough but not ruined. The bones were good. The kitchen still had the same yellow curtains Grandma Ruth had sewn herself 30 years ago. I found her letter in the bottom of my bag while I was looking for a phone charger. I sat on the kitchen floor and read it properly for the first time. She wrote that she had watched me my whole life and that I was the most quietly determined person she had ever known. She wrote that she had seen me start to dim a little in the last few years and that it had worried her. She wrote that the house wasn't just a house, it was the place where she had rebuilt herself after my grandfather left, where she had started her bookkeeping business, where she had learned that she was enough. She wrote, "I am leaving it to you because I think you might need a place to remember who you were before someone told you to be smaller." I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time. The neighbor who came to check on the house was a woman in her late 50s named Carol. She had been keeping an eye on the property since Grandma Ruth moved out. She knocked on the door the second morning, holding a casserole dish and looking only mildly surprised to find me there. I explained, in the vaguest terms I could manage, that I was going through something and needed some time. She nodded, like this was entirely reasonable, handed me the casserole, and told me she had a portable space heater I could borrow until I got the furnace sorted. Carol did not ask questions. She was the exact right person to know. I called the power company that afternoon from the driveway, where I got 2 bars of service. Power was back on by the following evening. I found a local HVAC company in a Google search on my phone, and they came out the next morning and had the furnace running within 2 hours. I paid with my personal account, the one Daniel hadn't known about, and was quietly grateful I had never let myself be talked into closing it. I also, in those first few days, began to understand something about the last 3 years that I had been avoiding. I am not a person who likes to think of herself as a victim. I went back and forth on this constantly in those early days at the house, alone, with a lot of quiet and not much distraction. I kept trying to build a case for the other side. He was generous, he was ambitious, he was under a lot of pressure, he loved me in his way. All of that might have been true. But it also didn't change what was true on my side, which was that I had shrunk, not all at once. Slowly, like a house settling so gradual, you don't notice until the floor is uneven under your feet. The program re-enrollment was not a betrayal, I knew that. Going back to school, my degree, my decision was not something I needed permission for. But I had been so thoroughly trained by 3 years of small corrections that doing it without telling him had felt, even to me, like something forbidden. That's the part that scared me most. My phone rang 4 times in those first days. Daniel, twice. His number. No voicemail. My mother, once I texted her that I was okay and needed a few days and would explain soon. My former advisor, once, to confirm my spring enrollment was processed. I didn't call Daniel back. On the 5th day, I took Grandma Ruth's letter and walked to the back of the property, to the old garden that had been overtaken by tall grass and determined weeds. It was cold, dry cold, the kind that makes everything very still. I stood there for a while and thought about what she had said about rebuilding. I thought about the bookkeeping business she had run for 22 years out of the back bedroom. I thought about how, growing up, I had always thought of Grandma Ruth as simply a strong person, never considering that she had become that way. That there had been a time before the strength. I went back inside and made a list of everything I had put on hold. The master's program was first on the list. Already done. Below it, the research I had started 2 years ago on early literacy gaps in underfunded districts. A paper I had outlined and then filed away because Daniel said academic publishing was a lot of effort for zero return. A community reading program I had applied to pilot at my school before I took the leave of absence, which had been accepted and then quietly abandoned when I stopped showing up. I had given up a lot of things so quietly I had almost forgotten I had given them up. I called my principal that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, which surprised me. I explained, without detail, that I had left my engagement and my living situation had changed and I was wondering about coming back in the spring. She said she had been hoping I would call. She said the reading program slot was still technically mine if I wanted it. She said, "Maya, we need you here, the kids have missed you." I cried for the first time since I'd arrived at the house. Not sad crying. The other kind. Over the following 2 weeks, I learned how to do things I had never needed to do in Daniel's world. I called the utility companies. I made a repair schedule for the house and worked through it room by room. I learned that the back door was rehangable with just a screwdriver and 20 minutes of patience. I repainted the porch railing with paint I found in the garage, the exact same white Grandma Ruth had used, the can still sealed. Carol brought food every few days and occasionally stayed for coffee. She didn't ask about Daniel. She did, once, mention that she had noticed a difference in me from the first day to the second week, that I seemed less like someone waiting for something to be over, and more like someone in the middle of building something. I said I thought that was probably accurate. My mother came for a weekend in week 3. I told her everything. Not the careful, edited version I had been preparing, but the real version, the dress he chose, the ceramics class I stopped going to, the program I re-enrolled in secretly, the way he had said leave in a voice that didn't rise at all. My mother listened without interrupting, which is not her natural mode, and when I finished, she took my hands across the kitchen table and said, "I wish you had told me sooner, I wish I had seen it sooner." I said I think I had gotten very good at performing fine. She said she knew. She said she had worried but hadn't wanted to push. We spent the rest of the weekend fixing the front door, weather stripping, and painting the second bedroom, and eating the kind of food that takes a long time to make because you're not in a hurry. The wedding date came and went. I spent it at the house. I made coffee in the morning and sat on the front porch in my coat and watched the empty street and thought about the 220 people who had received cancellation notices 2 weeks earlier. Daniel had sent them. A brief and factual message, no explanation. I thought about the florist and the venue deposit and the ivory dress hanging in a garment bag somewhere in Daniel's house. I felt the weight of all of it, and then I let it sit there and I drank my coffee. I didn't feel what I had expected to feel. I had expected grief. There was some grief, probably for the version of the future I had imagined, for the time I had given it, for the woman I had been before I learned to ask permission for my own choices. But underneath all of that was something steadier. I was in my grandmother's house. The heat worked. I was going back to my students in January. I had a research paper outlined in a new document on my laptop. I had repainted the porch railing. I had found, in the back of the hall closet, a box of Grandma Ruth's old bookkeeping ledgers. Neat, precise columns in her handwriting. Evidence of a business she had built from nothing in a house very much like the one I was sitting in. I had put the box on the shelf in the back bedroom, the room that would eventually become my office. 2 months later, I stood in front of my 4th grade class for the first time in over a year. 22 kids, 8 and 9 years old, who looked at me with the specific, unsentimental honesty that only children have. A boy in the second row said, "Where were you?" I said I had taken some time off, but I was back. He considered this and then said, "Okay, but also we have a substitute who lets us have extra recess and you should probably know that." I said I would take it under advisement. I started the reading program that spring. 6 students, twice a week, before school. By April we had 12. By the end of the year we had a wait list. My advisor called it one of the most promising early implementations she had seen and asked if I would write it up for the journal she co-edited. I wrote it up. The house, room by room, became mine. Not in the way that Daniel's house had been mine permitted, maintained on his terms, but mine in the way that matters. I knew where the circuit breaker stuck. I knew which step on the porch squeaked and that the previous owners had nailed it and Grandma Ruth had always just stepped over it instead because she liked the sound of a house that knew you were coming home. I thought about Grandma Ruth a lot in that first year. About the letter, which I had framed and hung in the back bedroom. About the question she had asked me the day I got engaged, does he make you feel like more of yourself or less? I had laughed it off as dramatic. But she had been asking me the only question that mattered, and I think somewhere I had known the answer even then, and that is the part I am still making peace with. I don't think I was naive, I think I was optimistic in a way that didn't leave enough room for honesty. I saw what I wanted to see, and I adjusted, again and again, because adjusting felt like love. Maybe for him it was, in the only way he knew how. I don't know. I'm not trying to resolve what Daniel was, or wasn't. I'm trying to tell you what I learned, which is this. The life I'm living now, the crowded reading program, the research paper, the porch railing I painted myself, the coffee in the morning before the street gets noisy is larger than the life I was walking toward. I found that out by losing everything I thought I wanted. And I found it in my grandmother's house, in a town without a traffic light, in the middle of winter, with 2 wool blankets and a box of granola bars and a door that needed rehanging. I rehung the door.